I have a question for you. Have you ever tried to explain something to someone and you realize they're not understanding what you're explaining? They're not really catching what you're throwing. This happened to me a couple months ago. I was leading a mission trip with some of our college students to Tucson, Arizona, and we were supposed to run a soccer camp. All of their volunteers left, and nobody on my team actually played soccer. I was the only one, and so we show up trying to do the soccer camp. So they gave me the oldest kids. So I had the 8 to 10-year-olds, and what we also didn't know is that none of the kids actually had any experience in playing soccer. So nobody on this field knew what they were doing, and it was really great. And so it was set up, they had 4 different stations, and so you would do 3 different stations of drills. And at the very end, you would get to scrimmage. So you would actually get to play the game. And so if you're a kid playing soccer, like, this is why you sign up for camp. And so I have these 2 boys in my group, and they're a ton of fun. Like, their names are Curtis and Bodie. But on the first day, they had a conversation that started before the camp started that pretty much lasted about 3 hours. You see, Curtis and Bodie, they're really into Pokemon. So much so that they had a conversation, they ended up getting into an argument because Bodie was really hurt that Curtis thought if he was a Pokemon character, it would be the Charmander. And this is happening. I don't know what a Charmander is. I don't think any of our volunteers knew what a Charmander was, but they were so ingrained in this conversation that they just didn't do the drills. They actually didn't know they were happening. And I'd say, Curtis, Bodie, like, let's put a pin in this conversation. I need you to pass the ball. No idea I was there because they were so ingrained in talking about a Charmander. It got so bad that we show up to the time to scrimmage, and they're standing in the center of the field. They're getting ready to start. The ref is waiting for my team to be ready. And I'm like, guys, you need to stop talking because we need to play this game. Like, you came here to play this game. They have no clue I'm talking to them. I'm talking to them for about 5 minutes, and finally I just go to the ref. I'm like, all right, start. The other team, they kick the ball, and the ball goes right past them, and they turn around and they look at me and go, we didn't know we were playing yet. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I've been talking to you for 5 minutes. They were not catching what I was throwing. And so the camp ends that first night, and I go back to my team, and I tell them about my interaction with Curtis and Bodie, and I'm like, all right, guys, do any of you know anything about Pokemon? And we had a few guys who did, and I go, okay, who is the worst Pokemon character, like the person you don't want to be? And they told me it was this thing called a Squirtle. And so I devised this plan that the next time Curtis and Bodie, that they started getting into an argument and weren't paying attention, I was going to say, okay, you guys, I know you can be a Pikachu. I know you can be the top-notch Pokemon dude, but y'all are acting like a Squirtle. And I had this whole plan, and so I show up the next day, and they weren't there, and that was probably a good thing for the sake of my own employment. I don't know how it would go if they found out I called a kid a Squirtle. But you see, hanging out with Curtis and Bodie, I realized that using stories and characters that they understood would have actually helped them know what they should be doing. It would help them be familiar with things they didn't understand. My role as their leader was helping them witness and understand things that they hadn't done before and that they hadn't seen before. And when we read through the New Testament and through the teachings of Jesus, he actually models this for us. Jesus uses what's called a parable. They are stories with problems and characters and context that the people around him would have understood and would have known. And he uses these to help them understand the deeper concepts of what God is like, what he is like, and what the kingdom of heaven is like. And this is the series that we're jumping into today. Jesus uses parables to invite his people into a deeper understanding of who he is. And so if you have your Bible, I invite you to turn to Matthew 13. We'll be in verse 44. But as you turn there, I want to just set up the context of this passage real quick. The Gospel of Matthew, it has one main consistent theme, and that is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, we would define it as God's active rule breaking into our world to restore his creation. It's the restoration that our souls have been longing for, like that tug we feel when we encounter things that are broken. The restoration of the healing and redemption that God has promised to usher in. And to the Jewish audience, the kingdom of heaven had a bit of a different connotation to it. For the Jewish audience, they believed that God's active rule in their life was a literal concept. It wasn't as much a soul needed healing, but rather God setting up a military leader and setting up a physical government here on earth. And what Jesus is doing is he's using these parables to reveal what the kingdom is actually like. He's doing so much more. And so he will use these parables to reveal the small mysteries of a magnificent kingdom. And in verse 44, we find two examples of what it's like. Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. These parables are centered around one phrase: the kingdom of heaven is like. Jesus is comparing familiar objects and ideas this community would know to reveal the beauty of an indescribable kingdom. And so we get to ask the question, what is the kingdom of heaven like? And the first thing that Jesus reveals is that the kingdom has value. In verse 44, we find a man who happens to come upon a piece of treasure in a field. Treasure has value. Treasure is ornate. It's immaculate, one of a kind. It can't be remade. Like, you can't just make treasure in a factory. When you find a treasure, it means that you found the only copy that exists. You found the only copy of something richly pure and delightful. And in verse 45, we read of a man looking for fine pearls. Not just any pearl. Like, a pearl is already valuable, but he's looking for a specific quality and character of a pearl. He is searching and opening every clam and shell to find a pearl that is without stain and without blemish, a pearl that is exquisite and pure in its beauty. The kingdom of heaven is filled with pure value, a value that no other earthly thing can be compared to. Growing up on Easter, my great-grandma, she would love to hide Easter eggs around her house, but she wouldn't put candy in them. She would put pennies in them. And growing up, like, the first year she did that, I was like, man, this is so cool. Look at all these pennies. And then I quickly learned I can't do anything with a penny. And then she kept doing this, and I'm like, I just come home with like hundreds and hundreds of pennies. I'm like, what am I gonna do with this? The penny is worthless. Like, a penny is so worthless, if I see it on the ground in the parking lot, it's not worth the back pain for me to pick it up. Like, that's how worthless a penny is to me. But you see, these men, they didn't find a penny. They found treasure. The merchant, he didn't find a penny, he found a pearl. They each found an incomparable treasure that was so great, they would sell every single thing they own just to have it. The kingdom of heaven is a treasure worth more than we can ever describe, and Jesus reveals it in this key detail. We read that the man, when he finds treasure, he doesn't take it with him, he actually plants it back into the ground. There was a law that if you bought a piece of land, you actually own everything in the land, whether the previous owner knew about it or not. So the man, when he plants the treasure back in the ground and he goes and buys the field, he makes sure that he actually gets to have the treasure. Instead of stealing the treasure for temporary gain, the man buys it for long-term connection. Because he buys the field, he has a rightful position to be with the treasure. In the same way, the merchant looking for fine pearls, when he finds one, he will sell all he has to buy it. It's not enough to say he saw it while he was at work. It's not enough to say that he touched it once. This man does everything he can to actually have the pearl. He too sells all of his possessions so he can keep the pearl. Jesus is revealing to us the insurmountable value of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is not a penny whose value slowly declines. It's a treasure so valuable, it's worth laying down every single thing we have for just a sliver of it. And oddly, in this act of surrendering, these two men receive joy. Jesus tells us that when these two men leave behind all that they have, they're filled with joy. And that's the second component of the kingdom, that the kingdom is filled with joy. And it feels kind of backwards when you think about it. Like, there's this guy, he is walking around and finds a random treasure and decides that it's neat enough he should sell all that he has. So that means he also probably sold his house. So now this dude doesn't have anywhere to live now, but he has a field, but he just spent his entire savings on buying the field, so he doesn't have anything left. And like y'all know, the housing market today is pretty crazy. So it's going to take him years to build up enough money to actually buy the materials, to then use those materials for a long-term investment of now building the house. You can't just build a house in one day and it feels backwards, but Jesus tells us that in his joy, he left everything he had. This guy, he didn't begrudgingly sell his stuff. He didn't anxiously sell it and hope a few days later he would feel better about the decision. This guy walked away from the field filled with joy that he gets the opportunity to leave behind all he has for the sake of the kingdom. And I think we have to ask the question, why? Why is this man so joyful to sell all he has for treasure? And I think we have to go back to our definition of the kingdom. We have to remember what it is. It's God's active rule breaking into this world, which means it's witnessing God's Spirit bring reconciliation to families. It's witnessing God's Spirit miraculously cure the incurable diagnosis. It's experiencing God's provision for those who lack. It's watching as God restores and fixes things that we have felt utterly powerless to fix. It's seeing God take the brokenness of who we are, redeem it and heal it, and then use us as people who reveal his beauty to others. You see, the kingdom of heaven is the place where God redeems us, transforms us, and empowers us to live in relationship with him. And this is why the man has joy, because he found the treasure of the entire world's redemption. And I wonder how the Jewish audience felt at this moment, because what Jesus is saying, it sounds spectacular. Like, it's so wonderful to be reminded that God is truly working in this world. But I wonder if this audience felt like the kingdom of heaven was actually there in their midst. I wonder if they think Jesus is talking about some far-off, distant land, because their circumstances don't currently reflect the kingdom. They've been overtaken by the Roman government. They live surrounded by shrines and temples to the Roman gods and goddesses. And so every day they walk outside, they literally smell people as they burn sacrifices and animals and as an act of worship to these gods and goddesses. They smell the worship that's happening to a god other than the God that they worship. And I'm wondering if they're asking if God's kingdom can actually be here. But Jesus tells us it is. The kingdom is here. A man, he buys the field because he found the treasure. A man, he buys the pearl because he found it. It was hidden, it was concealed, but it was there. The kingdom of heaven is often hidden, is often concealed, but it's here in ordinary spaces. It's in the empty field. The plot of land that is walked past and looked over. It's in the workplace of the merchant, the factory with long shifts and poor working conditions. There is nowhere too ordinary, mundane, or dark for the kingdom of heaven to appear. It's breaking out in your home. It's breaking out with your family and your friends and your community. It's breaking out in your place of work, in the hospitals, at schools. The kingdom of heaven is here. So when we ask the question, what is the kingdom of heaven like? Jesus teaches us that it's a place of immense value, filled with joy, breaking out right now in our very midst. And the beauty of asking and answering this question is that it not only invites us to look at what's in the kingdom, but to the person who rules the kingdom. It invites us to ask, what is the king like? You see, if the kingdom of heaven is valuable, it's only because the king himself has value. The king seated on the throne is the one who gives value and worth to the kingdom. The kingdom is only as good and beautiful and just as the one who sits on its throne. In other words, we would say that the king is worthy. The kingdom has worth because our God has immense worth. He is selfless and humble. He is strong and powerful. He is worthy, and it's his worth that gives value to the kingdom. Just as the man will give all he has for the treasure in the field, the Father will give his one and only Son for the treasure he has on earth, and it's his people. We are the treasure planted in the field. We are the pearl of great value, and God will give everything he has to bring us back to him. And in Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, he beautifully writes it this way. He says, Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The King who sits on the throne is the King of heaven, who became like us, lived like us, and humbled himself to experience our shame and our guilt. He was given every opportunity to use his power to escape our punishment, yet he laid it down. He surrendered his status and his position to save us. And this is why we proclaim that Jesus is worthy. But it goes even deeper than this, because Jesus, who was raised to new life, raised us up with him. And as followers of Jesus, we receive our God-given identity as citizens of a heavenly kingdom. And so what Jesus has earned, he shares with us. Because Jesus is worthy, we too are worthy. The way the Father sees his Son is the way the Father looks at us. The Father has called us chosen, redeemed, and he has named us as people who have worth and value, meaning that our worth and value doesn't come from what we achieve. It doesn't come from what we've earned. It comes from the one who redeemed us. We are worthy because Jesus is worthy. And the kingdom of heaven is the place where a worthy king dwells with people who are worthy of the saving power of his Son. Secondly, if we remember the kingdom of heaven is filled with joy, it would be because the king himself has joy. The kingdom isn't joyful because of the nice things that are in it. It's not joyful because the people have chased an emotion. The kingdom is filled with joy because the king himself is joy. Joy is a state of deep peace and delight, and Matthew tells us that this is what the man had when he sold all of his belongings just for some treasure. The man he gave away surrendered and chose to lose items he owned to attain just one of great value. In the midst of loss, the man has joy. And when we think about our King, our God, he is no stranger to loss or grief or suffering. Yet in the midst of it, his character remains the same. He remains the same God of joy. God's joy was never dependent on our actions or the state of the world. God himself is joyful. So what does this mean for us? It means that we have been invited to experience the King's joy. If we think back to the parable, Matthew tells us that it's in his joy that the merchant sells all that he has. In the midst of radical surrender and loss, the merchant has deep joy because of what he was gaining. Jesus is the merchant who gave his life for the joy of what he could gain, a relationship with his people. So for us to find joy, we don't find it through perfection or achieving. We find it in the one who is filled with joy about us. The psalmist says it this way. In Psalm 16, he says, "You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." God invites us into a life of deep peace, delight, and contentment by just sitting with him, talking to him, and listening to him. God is joyful, and what gives him the most joy is when his people dwell with him, when the creation he loves and prizes the most chooses to be with him. God is joyful because his Son Jesus made a way for us to be with him for the rest of eternity. And lastly, because the kingdom of heaven is here, we know that the King is also here. The kingdom of heaven is God's active rule breaking out right now into this world. It is God working to set things right, to heal and to redeem what's broken. But God sets things right through his presence. He heals and he restores through his presence. We see that the evidence of the kingdom is merely physical evidence of his presence. There is no such thing as an ordinary field because the king is here. It's a field that's going to be filled with the treasures of his kingdom. A few months ago, my friend and I, we were at an SDSU basketball game. And they were winning by like 40 points, so we left early. And we're trying to find her car in this gigantic parking lot. There's nobody else around, super dark. And we're just walking. And all of a sudden on the ground, I see like this wad of paper. And I don't know why, but I kind of just kept looking at it. And we got closer, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is like money. And there's like nobody around. And so I figured it'd just be like $1. So like I bend down, and I won't bend down for a penny, but I'll bend down for $1. So I bend down and I pick it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is $20. And my friend, I'm just holding it, I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And my friend kept walking, and she like turns around, and she's like, Emily, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just found $20. But as I go to like lift it up and show her, I realized, no, they were two $20 bills in there. I was like, I just found $40 in a parking lot. And I'm looking around and nobody's there, but someone had been there. The treasure I found in the parking lot, it was a sign that someone had been there before us. Someone had been walking near those cars. What they left behind was just a sign of their presence. You see, the evidence of the kingdom is the evidence that God has never left us and he never will. It's evidence that he was working in ordinary and mundane and unexpected places all along. God has sent us his Holy Spirit, which means that we're never left alone. The real treasure isn't the things that God can give us, it's that his presence is always with us. We wake up each day knowing that God's Spirit has gone before us, stands behind us, and walks with us. In Psalm 39, the psalmist says it this way: "Where can I go from your Spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings on the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." There is nowhere we can go that God's presence won't find us. God is at work in our lives by the presence of his Spirit, opening our eyes to the treasures of the kingdom that are right before us. We've seen him answer our prayers. We've seen him radically provide. We've seen him take our broken lives and bring healing to them. And for the treasures and the healing that we're still waiting to find, we get to trust that he's still deeply working in the fields that maybe feel empty right now. Jesus, he uses the parables to invite us into a deeper understanding of his kingdom, his character, and how he sees us. And I invite you this morning to take the posture of, what do you need to receive from God right now? This morning, do you need to receive that because your king is worthy, that you are also worthy? That his kingdom has value, and the people of his kingdom also have value? This morning, do you need to receive that you're invited into a life of joy? That maybe even in the midst of loss and suffering and anxiety, that God has still invited you to share in what's good. He's still invited you to share in his delight. Or maybe do you need to receive the hope that God is still at work in your life? Do you need to remember that the kingdom is still unfolding whether or not you see it? Would you pray with me? Jesus, we are just really grateful for your word. That in the same way you taught your people then, you give us your Spirit now to speak to us through your word, to help reveal the truths about the kingdom so that we could grow in a knowledge of who you are and of what your kingdom is like, but also in how you see us. And so we just pray today that you would remind us that you truly do see us as people who are worthy, that we are people that you delight in, and that we are people who are never left alone. And so would you continue to take our worship as a sign and as our offering to declare that you are worthy, you are good, and that you are here. We love you and we praise you. Amen.